MTC. Unit 16 No analysis. Comma. Consider the story of two men quarreling in a library. One wants the window open and the other wants it closed. They argue back and forth about how much to leave it open, a crack, halfway, or 3/4 of the way. 4-3. No solution satisfies them both. Enter the librarian. She asks one why he wants the window open, to get some fresh air. She asks the other why he wants it closed, to avoid a draft. After thinking a minute, she opens wide a window in the next room, bringing in fresh air without a draft. This story is typical of many negotiations. Since the parties' problem appears to be a conflict of positions, they naturally tend to talk about positions and often reach an impasse. The librarian could not have invented the solution she did if she had focused only on the two men's stated positions of wanting the window open or closed. Instead, she looked to their underlying interests of fresh air and no draft. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 01. Comma. When trying to sustain an independent ethos, cultures face a problem of critical mass. No single individual, acting on his or her own, can produce an ethos. Rather, an ethos results from the interdependent acts of many individuals. This cluster of produced meaning may require some degree of insulation from larger and wealthier outside forces. The Canadian Inuit maintain their own ethos, even though they number no more than 24,000. 2-4. They manage this feat through a combination of trade, to support their way of life, and geographic isolation. The Inuit occupy remote territory, removed from major population centers of Canada. If cross-cultural contact were to become sufficiently close, the Inuit ethos would disappear. Distinct cultural groups of similar size do not, in the long run, persist in downtown Toronto, Canada, where they come in contact with many outside influences and pursue essentially Western paths for their lives. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 02. Comma. In one survey, 61% of Americans said that they supported the government spending more on assistance to the poor. 61%. But when the same population was asked whether they supported spending more government money on welfare, only 21% were in favor. 21%. In other words, if you ask people about individual welfare programs such as giving financial help to people who have long-term illnesses and paying for school meals for families with low income, people are broadly in favor of them. But if you ask about welfare, which refers to those exact same programs that you've just listed, they're against it. The word welfare has negative connotations, perhaps because of the way many politicians and newspapers portray it. Therefore, the framing of a question can heavily influence the answer in many ways, which matters if your aim is to obtain a true measure of what people think. And next time you hear a politician say surveys prove that the majority of the people agree with me, be very wary. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 03. Comma. We commonly argue about the fairness of taxation, whether this or that tax will fall more heavily on the rich or the poor. But the expressive dimension of taxation goes beyond debates about fairness, to the moral judgments societies make about which activities are worthy of honor and recognition, and which ones should be discouraged. Sometimes, these judgments are explicit. Taxes on tobacco, alcohol, and casinos are called sin taxes because they seek to discourage activities considered harmful or undesirable. Such taxes express society's disapproval of these activities by raising the cost of engaging in them. Proposals to tax sugary sodas, to combat obesity, or carbon emissions, to address climate change, likewise seek to change norms and shape behavior. Not all taxes have this aim. We do not tax income to express disapproval of paid employment or to discourage people from engaging in it. Nor is a general sales tax intended as a deterrent to buying things. These are simply ways of raising revenue. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 04. Comma. When we think of culture, we first think of human cultures, of our culture. We think of computers, airplanes, fashions, teams, and pop stars. For most of human cultural history, none of those things existed. For hundreds of thousands of years, no human culture had a tool with moving parts. Well into the 20th century, various human foraging cultures retained tools of stone, wood, and bone. 20. We might pity human hunter-gatherers for their stuck simplicity, but we would be making a mistake. They held extensive knowledge, knew deep secrets of their lands and creatures. And they experienced rich and rewarding lives. We know so because when their ways were threatened, they fought to hold on to them, to the death. Sadly, this remains true as the final tribal peoples get overwhelmed by those who value money above humanity. We are living in their end times and, to varying extents, we're all contributing to those endings. Ultimately our values may even prove self-defeating. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 05. Comma. When an important change takes place in your life, observe your response. If you resist accepting the change, it is because you are afraid of losing something. Perhaps you might lose your position, property, possession, or money. The change might mean that you lose privileges or prestige. Perhaps with the change you lose the closeness of a person or a place. In life, all these things come and go and then others appear, which will also go. It is like a river in constant movement. If we try to stop the flow, we create a dam, the water stagnates and causes a pressure which accumulates inside us. To learn to let go, to not cling and allow the flow of the river, is to live without resistances, being the creators of constructive changes that bring about improvements and widen our horizons. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 06. Comma. The invention of the mechanical clock was influenced by monks who lived in monasteries that were the examples of order and routine. They had to keep accurate time so that monastery bells could be rung at regular intervals to announce the 7 hours of the day reserved for prayer. Early clocks were nothing more than a weight tied to a rope wrapped around a revolving drum. Time was determined by watching the length of the weighted rope. The discovery of the pendulum in the 17th century led to the widespread use of clocks and enormous public clocks. 17. Eventually, keeping time turned into serving time. People started to follow the mechanical time of clocks rather than their natural body time. They ate at meal time, rather than when they were hungry, and went to bed when it was time, rather than when they were sleepy. Even periodicals and fashions became yearly. The world had become orderly. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 07. Comma. Since we know we can't completely eliminate our biases, we need to try to limit the harmful impacts they can have on the objectivity and rationality of our decisions and judgments. It is important that we are aware when one of our cognitive biases is activated and make a conscious choice to overcome that bias. We need to be aware of the impact the bias has on our decision-making process in our life. Then we can choose an appropriate debiasing strategy to combat it. After we have implemented a strategy, we should check in again to see if it worked in the way we had hoped. If it did, we can move on and make an objective and informed decision. If it didn't, we can try the same strategy again or implement a new one until we are ready to make a rational judgment. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 08. Comma. Habits create the foundation for mastery. In chess, it is only after the basic movements of the pieces have become automatic that a player can focus on the next level of the game. Each chunk of information that is memorized opens up the mental space for more effortful thinking. This is true for anything you attempt. When you know the simple movements so well that you can perform them without thinking, you are free to pay attention to more advanced details. In this way, habits are the backbone of any pursuit of excellence. However, the benefits of habits come at a cost. At first, each repetition develops fluency, speed, and skill. But then, as a habit becomes automatic, you become less sensitive to feedback. You fall into mindless repetition. It becomes easier to let mistakes slide. When you can do it good enough automatically, you stop thinking about how to do it better. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 No 09. Comma. Regardless of whether the people existing after agriculture were happier, healthier, or neither, it is undeniable that there were more of them. Agriculture both supports and requires more people to grow the crops that sustain them. Estimates vary, of course, but evidence points to an increase in the human population from 1 to 5 million people worldwide to a few hundred million once agriculture had become established. 1.5. And a larger population doesn't just mean increasing the size of everything, like buying a bigger box of cereal for a larger family. It brings qualitative changes in the way people live. For example, more people means more kinds of diseases, particularly when those people are sedentary. Those groups of people can also store food for long periods, which creates a society with haves and have-nots. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 Number 10. Comma. The lotus plant, a white water lily, grows in the dirty, muddy bottom of lakes and ponds, yet despite this, its leaves are always clean. That is because whenever the smallest particle of dust lands on the plant, it immediately waves the leaf, directing the dust particles to one particular spot. Raindrops falling on the leaves are sent to that same place, to thus wash the dirt away. This property of the lotus led researchers to design a new house paint. Researchers began working on how to develop paints that wash clean in the rain, in much the same way as lotus leaves do. As a result of this investigation, a German company produced a house paint. On the market in Europe and Asia, the product even came with a guarantee that it would stay clean for 5 years without detergents or sandblasting. 5. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 Number 11. Comma. Like the physiological discoveries of the late 19th century, today's biological breakthrough has fundamentally altered our understanding of how the human organism works and will change medical practice fundamentally and thoroughly. 1.9. The word breakthrough, however, seems to imply in many people's minds an amazing, unprecedented revelation that, in an instant, makes everything clear. Science doesn't actually work that way. Remember the scientific method, which you probably first learned about back in elementary school. It has a long and difficult process of observation, hypothesis, experiment, testing, modifying, retesting, and retesting again and again and again. That's how science works, and the breakthrough understanding of the relationship between our genes and chronic disease happened in just that way, building on the work of scientists from decades, even centuries ago. In fact, it is still happening. The story continues to unfold as the research presses on. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 Number 12. Comma. You know that forks don't fly off to the moon and that neither apples nor anything else on Earth cause the sun to crash down on us. The reason these things don't happen is that the strength of gravity's pull depends on two things. The first is the mass of the object. The apple is very small, and doesn't have much mass, so its pull on the sun is absolutely tiny, certainly much smaller than the pull of all the planets. The Earth has more mass than tables, trees, or apples, so almost everything in the world is pulled towards the Earth. That's why apples fall from trees. Now, you might know that the sun is much bigger than Earth and has much more mass. So why don't apples fly off towards the sun? The reason is that the pull of gravity also depends on the distance to the object doing the pulling. Although the sun has much more mass than the Earth, we are much closer to the Earth, so we feel its gravity more. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 Number 13. Comma. Testing strategies relating to direct assessment of content knowledge still have their value in an inquiry-driven classroom. Let's pretend for a moment that we wanted to ignore content and only assess a student's skill with investigations. The problem is that the skills and the content are interconnected. When a student fails at pattern analysis, it could be because they do not understand how to do the pattern analysis properly. However, it also could be that they did not understand the content that they were trying to build patterns with. Sometimes students will understand the processes of inquiry well, and be capable of skillfully applying social studies disciplinary strategies, yet fail to do so because they misinterpret the content. For these reasons, we need a measure of a student's content understanding. To do this right, we need to make sure our assessment is getting us accurate measures of whether our students understand the content they use in an inquiry. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 Number 14. Comma. Without money, people could only barter. Many of us barter to a small extent, when we return favors. A man might offer to mend his neighbor's broken door in return for a few hours of babysitting, for instance. Yet it is hard to imagine these personal exchanges working on a larger scale. What would happen if you wanted a loaf of bread and all you had to trade was your new car? Barter depends on the double coincidence of wants, where not only does the other person happen to have what I want, but I also have what he wants. Money solves all these problems. There is no need to find someone who wants what you have to trade, you simply pay for your goods with money. The seller can then take the money and buy from someone else. Money is transferable and deferrable. The seller can hold on to it and buy when the time is right. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 Number 15. Comma. Brain research provides a framework for understanding how the brain processes and internalizes athletic skills. In practicing a complex movement such as a golf swing, we experiment with different grips, positions and swing movements, analyzing each in terms of the results it yields. This is a conscious, left brain process. Once we identify those elements of the swing that produce the desired results, we rehearse them over and over again in an attempt to record them permanently in muscle memory. In this way, we internalize the swing as a kinesthetic feeling that we trust to recreate the desired swing on demand. This internalization transfers the swing from a consciously controlled left brain function to a more intuitive or automatic right brain function. This description, despite being an oversimplification of the actual processes involved, serves as a model for the interaction between conscious and unconscious actions in the brain, as it learns to perfect an athletic skill. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 16 Number 16. Comma. One of the first things I did in each classroom in South Milwaukee was to draw a diagram of the students' desks, labeled with their names, as an aid to recognizing them. South Milwaukee. At lunch in the first grade classroom the first day I was present, a group of students came over, saw the diagram, and began finding their names on my picture. One said, "Where's your name?" and was not satisfied until I included a sketch of the chair by the bookcase where I was sitting, labeled with my name. It had not occurred to me that I needed to be included. After all, I knew where I was sitting, and knew my name. But to her, my presence in the classroom was the newest, most noteworthy thing that had occurred that day, and it was logical to include me. Her point of view was different from mine, and resulted in a different diagram of the classroom.